It's Wednesday, April 12th, 2017. I'm your host, Sarah Mantle. We have a great show in store for you today. First up, March was a great month for real estate in Barnstable County. We're going to get details with Register of Deeds Jack Mead. Then we'll catch up with Energy Coordinator Richard Elrick. And finally, we'll learn more about an effort to bring rail service to Bourne with Cape Cod Regional Transit Authority Administrator Tom Kerr. All of that on this episode of Barnstable Today. But first, let's go ahead and get a look at today's top headlines. Liquor license holders in the town of Barnstable will meet with the Barnstable Police Department this week. Chief of Police Paul McDonald says the meetings will help keep business owners up to date with required policies and procedures when it comes to selling alcohol.
We've been doing this now for probably the past 10 years. We invite everyone who has a liquor license, someone who serves alcohol at their establishments. There'll be a licensing meeting later for people who are package stores. But tomorrow's meeting is just for licensing holders who serve alcohol on their establishment. And what we do is we go through all of the rules and regulations, that they have to comply with, and what we expect from them, and then we let them know what they can expect from us. How often are we going to check on them, and if we are going to have a reverse thing, underage string, which sometimes we do that. We work with the ABC, and we do that, towards the end of the summer. But we just want to make sure everybody's operating on the same page before the summer season starts, and we've done this annually. We usually get a good response from it. There are a couple of new restaurants, new bars opening up in town, and we just want to get everybody on the same page, and we're all working together so we can all have a great summer.
The first alcohol compliance meetings will be held today, one at 10 and one at 2 in the Town Hall hearing room. A third meeting will be held tomorrow at 10 a.m. in the Town Hall hearing room. Well, it's springtime, and that means many of us will be out cleaning up our yards. Residents are able to burn some yard debris during this time of year, but are required to obtain a permit first. West Barnstable Fire Chief Joe Maruca says there are also a few important things to remember when burning.
Keep it 75 feet away from buildings. Make sure that you have some water available, a hose, buckets, some way of dousing the fire, or at least cutting it back in size quickly if you need to. Don't try and burn it all at once. Start with a small pile and add things to it as the day goes on. Burning's allowed from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., so you've got a fairly long period of time. You're not allowed to burn stumps and big logs. This is strictly for small brush, branches, and things. So, keep it simple.
And once you have that permit, it is still important to notify your local fire department before burning yard waste. The Charter Review Committee will get to work this week. The committee will be discussing possible changes to the town's charter. Discussion items include the town collector position, preliminary elections, term limits, and filing of vacancies. The Charter Review Committee meets at 6 Thursday, April 13th in the Selectmen's Conference Room. Up next, we're going to get the latest real estate numbers with Register of Deeds Jack Mead. Joining me now over the phone, Register of Deeds Jack Mead. Jack, looking over the numbers for the latest real estate numbers for Barnstable County, looking like it was a pretty good month for the month of March.
Very solid month of March 2017. We were up nearly 20% in the total volume of activity compared to a year ago, and the value of sales was up 16.9, basically 17% from last year. Resulted in an individual sales value up 10% over the previous year, so very strong month.
That's a lot of good news to take in. Looking about the volume of sales, when we compare these numbers, we're comparing them to the same time last year. So this isn't like we can say, well, it's finally springtime, because also we know that the month of March was pretty darn cold here in in the county of Barnstable. So, really, that's kind of an amazing feat, I think, for the real estate market.
Well, we were down in February, so we made up for it a little bit in March. So, but for the year to date, we're up over 8%, in terms of volume, which is really great. And it means the market is still cooking along, or at a decent level, and so I'm confident and hopeful that that will continue. It's funny, the March sales probably are deals that happened in January and February, or got initialized in January and February. So I don't know if we'll have a slowdown because we had a cold March. It's funny, the March, as you pointed out, was one of the coldest months of the winter.
Yeah,
And,
amazingly. It was crazy.
I don't know if that will slow people down a little bit for April and May, but I don't think so. I think
we'll hope not. We'll cross our fingers.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the value of sales, because you said that did go up. What was the average value of sale for the month of March?
We were up to 330,000 for the month of March, as compared to last year where it was 300,000. So we saw a nice, that's a significant bump, obviously 10%, and so that's a good trend. It's one we've been seeing. The values tend to go up as we get into the spring, and we saw that happening last year. Where we started to move out of the low 300,000 range to the mid 300,000 range, and it's not a big surprise that we saw a little bit of a dip as we get into January, February, and March, just because we're having fewer sales. So there's your median number tends to go down with fewer sales, but as we move up, with volume, you're going to start to see, that means more is happening at all ends of the market, and I would expect that we're going to see the median prices move back towards the 350 area where we've been.
That's exciting. And I have to say, it probably has a lot of home owners feeling a little bit more secure about their investment in their property, I'm sure.
I hope so. It's been a long time. We've been, a slow crawl back to, stability. But I think one of the things that we're seeing is that there is some stability in the market in the sense that people can see a priced home and get a sense that it's, this is a real price. Again, it's all, a lot of it's hard to gauge sometimes, but because the market is the market at any particular time. But what we're seeing is this market growth is built over a slow but steady increase in value over the last 4 or 5 years, so that we haven't been seeing these 20% bumps, that are hard to sustain over the long term, as we know from unfortunate experience, for the last 10, the previous 10 years. So this most recent increase in activity seems to be based on 5% increase, somewhere in the mid 4 or 5% increase annually, which is, I think, at a sustainable level, and it fits with long-term historic patterns of real estate growth. So
right, which is such good news. When was the lowest? As we look back in history, we really saw those home values really climb, and then I think it was around 2008 or so that we saw those home values just really plummet, and a lot of people found themselves underwater with their mortgage. So
right.
When was the lowest point for home values?
Well, let's see. I would say, 09, probably 10. We were in, things. The peak was probably back in 06. Okay.
Okay.
And then we started to see a decline, and then we really started to see the whole foreclosure eruption occurred in 08, and began in 08, 09. We saw a tremendous number of foreclosures happening, and that really depressed the market at that point significantly. And so, we probably had a 40% drop at one point, if you really measured it out. And that was similar to what we saw back in the, for us old-timers, we saw back in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, when we had a build-up in the 80s, and then we had a real sort of a Wile E. Coyote moment in 87 when, it just stopped, and then things were really depressed for a while, with 91 being the nadir, and then we saw a build-up, that happened over the 90s slowly, and then really accelerated in the early 2000s, and then again we had another significant drop-off in the late 2000s, and so we're now slowly building up from that again, and but it's hard to put a finger on exactly, Tempus Fugit, but I'd say 09 was probably the low point.
Now, after that point, I know a lot of regulations were put in place to try and prevent this kind of thing or prevent some predatory lending practices. Do you think that's helped to stabilize our housing market?
I think there are pluses and minuses involved anytime you make it more difficult for people to borrow and get into properties. There are causes and effects there, that have some pluses and have some minuses. I think the idea of the level of paperwork that people have to go through to get to a mortgage process, I don't know how helpful that is at the end of the day for a lot of people. There's a me-go fact, my eyes glaze over factor when you get in place with, literally hundreds of pages of stuff that go into a mortgage, and of course all that paperwork adds cost to the process as well. So we're not seeing the volume levels that we saw back a while back, but I'm sure in some cases it helps. I think the industry needed to, get cleaned up to some degree, but I think in a lot of ways it makes it more difficult for people to qualify, and so there's all sorts of, there are ups and downs with that, and I'm not sure at the end of the day we'll have to look back and figure out if that was a blessing or not in terms of imposing more, rules and regulations on the foreclosure end of it. I mean, there are different levels of that, and different impacts. Like on the foreclosure side, there are all sorts of rules, and a lot of those rules that came into effect caused homes to, I think, to, in the grand scheme, to sit empty or unsold that were in distress for a longer period that had negative impacts to neighborhoods.
Right, because you don't want a foreclosed home that's sitting empty and obviously
Right,
it could be run
right.
down, sort of drawing down the prices of homes nearby.
Right. I mean, there may have been benefits for the people involved, whether they were, wrongly being foreclosed or whatever, and they could maybe fight that. And in some cases, they were, they weren't paying the mortgages, and that unfortunately is the fact of life with mortgages. So, but in the end, if the process gets stretched out, and it took much longer for a foreclosed property or to get, through the process, that was bringing down property values, in the neighborhoods affected as well, and I don't think that's a good thing either. So there are those are some of the negative consequences that somebody doing an economic study later on could validate or invalidate. But those from a anecdotal look, it does and I know we talked about this in properties and in some of those cities and stuff that were more harshly affected, that really did a number on some of these neighborhoods. So there are when houses are abandoned or left not able to get sold quickly, then there is a real problem for the rest of the neighborhood involved. So,
well, thank you for kind of giving it over and kind of taking a look at the past and the trends, and very excited to see such great numbers, Barnstable County real estate numbers for the month of March.
Well, knock on wood, we'll be able to have the same report or even better next month.
Awesome. Well, thanks for taking the time with us, Jack. We really appreciate it.
All right, Sarah.
Talk to you
soon.
Thank
you. Take care.
All right,
bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Our guest today, Register of Deeds, Jack Mead. Now we're going to check in with Energy Coordinator Richard Elrick. Well, Richard, thank you so much for joining us today. Finally we have some sunshine back for us. So what do we need to know? How can we save money on energy costs in the springtime? This may be the time when we're probably pretty quickly maybe going to turn on some air conditioning. What do we have to think about to save money on electricity?
Yeah, and that's obviously a good question and what we're going to talk about today. And I know a lot of people, it's sort of still a little bit early, but I think it is good always to sort of think ahead. And these are important things, not only because we're trying to reduce our energy use for green reasons, but to save a little money. And I do have a quick list that we'll go through. Obviously, we're getting ready to put in our air conditioners, so you want to make sure they're tuned up, that the filters are cleaned. There's as much as 15% of the household's summertime energy costs go through our air conditioners. So you want your air conditioner to be working tip-top form. You want to check your water tank periodically. It's recommended once a year you drain maybe a quarter of your water tank to get rid of some of those sediments that tend to build up. And then you want to maintain it at about 120 degrees. Many people have their water tanks much too hot, more hot than it needs to be from an energy perspective, and it's also obviously a little bit more dangerous. You can get scalded. One thing that I was reading that really seemed to make sense, and it's a great opportunity: clean out your fridge and clean your fridge.
Really?
We build up an awful lot, as we all know, in our refrigerators that ends up in the back of it. And to the degree that it is overfilled, you don't get good ventilation in there. So that's one thing, and this is an opportunity to get rid of all the stuff that we don't want in there. And then behind your refrigerator, you want to vacuum as well. A lot of the coils can get covered in dust. And so it's not operating as efficiency. So that's another task. You want to seal all your cracks and your air ducts. You don't want all that air-conditioned air escaping. That's something important you can do. Embrace natural ventilation. Well, some of this is obvious, I think, certainly. But, you know, early in the morning, open your windows, get that fresh air coming in. Nighttime, we close them up to, to hold on to what we've got. Obviously, it's different in the summer as we move into that warmer air. We want our thermostats to be maintained at about 78 degrees. We're talking about the air conditioning now. A lot of people try to get it colder, but it's just not efficient, and it's really not as comfortable as you would think. 78 is the ideal temperature. One thing that people can do, they can put a thermal backing on their windows if they've really got a tough southern exposure and that heat is blasting through and they don't have another option. Some of that thermal backing can be helpful. And then really, I'd urge everybody who doesn't have Energy Star appliances to obtain those. And this is like up and down the board with respect to all of our appliances. That can save a huge amount of energy, as well as your LED lighting. Switching, moving forward with our changeover from incandescent to fluorescent and then on to LED, that could save households up to about 50% of their energy savings. So those are things I think that people can do, pretty easy stuff, and get you thinking about energy savings and getting ready for the summertime.
Wow. So many great tips right there. First of all, definitely have to get to cleaning, because it sounds like that can really help. And some of those tips I would have never thought to do or check out. So thank you very much for that. One thing that just recently got started at the transfer station is that food waste recycling program. How is the program going? It's
just getting started. We're trying to get the word out. Obviously releasing press releases and those sorts of things, and then talking here on our public access television. But one of the most important things people need to be aware of is what goes into the compost bins. And we may get a screenshot. Well, here's a list, I think, up on the screen now that you can see of what should go in your composting bin and what should stay out. And of course, there's a lot of obvious things up there on the left as you look at it.
A lot more can go in than I thought would be acceptable. So for example, I'm surprised to see meat and bone scraps on there. That's fabulous. This is really going to cut down, I think, when I start to do this, because I haven't yet started. Yep. But when I start to do this is going to really, if you think about it, make your trash a little easier to deal with, right?
No question about it. I was at the transfer station the other day, and wonderfully, a lady was taking advantage of the drop-off for her kitchen scraps, and that was the one comment she made, how wonderful it is to be able to dispose of bones and grease drippings at the same time. Typically, that's not included. But our partner in this composting effort, Watts Family Farms, specifically allows for those sorts of things. And I should also mention that our program is, to some degree, at least funded through a grant from Mass DEP. So that's an important
Wonderful.
note
Also
to
to see paper towel and napkins in there. You could just clear your plates when you're done with dinner. Throw it all in that food bin and you're ready to go. Absolutely.
And of course, the key things not to include, again, we would like to think this is common sense, but certainly no kitty litter, as one would expect. No aluminum foil, cardboard. Naturally, that's something that's recyclable in another location. Styrofoam, metals, plastic, glass. Those are the kinds of things that end up in the food waste that we want to keep out.
Great. Good to know. Also want to talk to you before we wrap up today. You know, one of the missions to save energy is to change and convert some of the parking lot lights to LED bulbs. How is that going?
It's coming great. We have been slowly working our way through all of the different municipal parking lots the town has, and there must be at least 20, probably a little bit more than that. And most of those parking lots have some kind of floodlights that have to date been either high pressure sodium or metal halide. And typically the wattages that are used in those kinds of bulbs and lamps is anywhere between 150 watts and 400 watts. So that's a lot of inefficient energy. So what we've been doing, again, moving through our municipal lots, is switching out the high pressure sodium and LED for, high pressure sodium and metal halide for LED, saves about 50% of the energy costs, plus the bulbs last much longer. And the project we're about ready to start working on is the DPW Highway building and its campus. We've got about 24 what are called wall packs, which are essentially just lights that are on the outside of buildings, and those are all being replaced. So we're going from as much as 400 watt wall packs down to 100 or less. And our 150 watt bulbs that are the metal halide and HPS are going down to 50 watts or less. So we're reducing our wattage by about 50%, enhancing the longevity of the lamps and reducing the cost as well. So it really, it's a win-win all the way around. Very excited about it. It's just one more step to make the town a little bit greener.
Always important not only to be good, healthy for the environment, but also to save money. We really appreciate you stopping by, Richard, and hope to chat with you in the near future. Our guest today, Energy Coordinator Richard Elrick. Joining me now live on the phone, Cape Cod Regional Transit Administrator Tom Kerr. Tom, some interesting news coming out of Boston. Officials are thinking about moving forward with the South Coast Rail project. Some hope this could mean we could see some rail service to Bourne. What can you tell us about this?
Well, Sarah, this has been an issue that's been around for actually decades now. Some time ago, well, in my previous life, when I was in the legislature and served on the Transportation Committee, I always talked about perhaps extending commuter rail from Middleborough to Buzzards Bay. And in subsequent years, the various governors came along and committed to service to Fall River and New Bedford, two major cities on the South Coast. So those two cities became a very high priority for governor after governor, it seemed. And there were studies and efforts made to provide rail service to those two communities. And a lot of money has been invested in terms of the planning effort and the like. And so there have been advancements in terms of how it will eventually happen. But most recently, Representative Strauss from Mattapoisett, who's the chairman of the Joint Committee on Transportation in the House, a position that I used to have, and Bill was on my committee when I was chairman. He has tried to champion a new approach to the whole Fall River New Bedford plan by going through Middleborough so that the administration could announce that not only have they addressed the Fall River New Bedford problem, but they've also given an opportunity to catch Cape Cod by going to Buzzards Bay. And Governor Baker, I understand, has been receptive, and Secretary Pollock has been receptive to those ideas. It's been a very long and costly endeavor getting to those two cities, and they've had to go through what is known as the Stoughton branch. And the Stoughton branch goes through a swamp, the Hockomock Swamp, and there's environmental issues that are quite challenging and quite costly. So by going this other route through Middleborough in the interim, it would be about half the cost to provide the service. And I think that's why it's receptive to the administration. And it's currently ongoing, the comment period. I think it goes till April 28th to voice your support for the Buzzards Bay piece of it. So I think there's a lot of excitement and confidence that there might be some commuter rail to Buzzards Bay if this plan prevails. And the Stoughton plan will still move forward, but they're electrifying the lines over there. It's a much more detailed plan. So that would be 5 or 6, 7, 8 more years down to those cities via Stoughton. So the Middleborough route, which is existing, would already provide that service. So it's kind of a long-winded explanation about how Buzzards Bay might get service, but I think for the first time in several years, there's a realistic shot that that there might be some sort of commuter service to Buzzards Bay, which would, provide an economic jump to the village of Buzzards Bay. And I know that the selectmen and town administrator and others in the community have been on record as very supportive for some time.
See, important to have that local support. You mentioned that there is a comment period that goes on much into April, so further into April. Do state officials really take into consideration what locals have to say? So if you have a lot of Cape Codders urging them to really go ahead with this plan, will they take a note of that?
That's a good question, Sarah. I always encourage the citizenry to voice their concerns and show up at meetings, write letters, provide testimony. And I know that they do analyze all the testimony that comes in. I don't know how much influence that has. I would think that it has some influence, obviously, but I think what really helps, and what I've noticed over the years, is if the community leaders, state reps and left selectmen and those folks are on board. Obviously, the administration pays attention to those people, particularly legislators, because they appropriate the funds to make all of this stuff happen. So if there's opposition in the local community to an issue, my experience suggests that the administration's not really warm to pursuing it in earnest. But if there's a unanimity like there is for this effort in Mother's Day, I think there's a lot more chance of it happening. Although it's a costly undertaking, and you want to make sure that there are economic benefits and there's value not only to the community but to the region. So it's a lengthy process, like all things are when it comes to getting something through government. But I think it has merit, and I think it's moving along well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for that update. We really appreciate it. And we'll keep our eye on the developments there. And of course, thank you so much for joining us today. Look forward to chatting with you again in the near future.
Thank you, Sarah. Nice
Thanks.
to talk to you.
You as well.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Tom.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Our guest today, CCRTA Administrator Tom Kerr. Now let's go ahead and find out what's happening around town in today's community calendar. The Barnstable Youth Commission is hosting a job fair for all youth 18 and under. The event will be a great opportunity for kids to learn how to prepare for an interview, learn how to write a resume, and how to complete a job application. The Youth Job Fair will be held at the Hyannis Youth and Community Center today, Wednesday, April 12th, from 2:30 to 5 p.m. The Land Acquisition and Preservation Committee is hosting a spring walking weekend this weekend. There will be guided walks at many trails here in Barnstable beginning this Friday and going through Monday, April 17th. You can get a full list of walks, times, and locations by visiting the town's website and looking under notifications in the upper right-hand corner. Well, we'll be here with another great show for you tomorrow. For Barnstable Today, I'm Sarah Mantle.